BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. On Wednesdays this year, I've been talking to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved murder mystery. And in this episode, I'm going to be discussing the case of Alice McKenzie, who is a possible Ripper victim. And there are numerous Jack the Ripper victims out there. I mean, we have cases going all the way back to 1865 and perhaps before, and we definitely have cases in the 20th century, such as the Camden Town murder, which could also be attributed to Jack the Ripper. But the murder of Alice McKenzie is one that has given a lot of strong thought, and a lot of people believe that either Alice McKenzie was murdered by Jack the Ripper, or there's a very strong possibility. Alice McKenzie, though, was not murdered in 1888 like the other canonical Ripper victims. She was murdered in 1889. Jack the Ripper was a serial killer who was more famous for his activities in 1888, committing the murders that are attributed to the Autumn of Terror, which actually began in the summer, going from August 31st, 1888, and ending on November 9th of that year with the murder of Mary Kelly, which is perhaps one of the most famous unsolved murders in the entire history of the world. So, as far as my introduction to this case, I found that there are a lot of strong Jack the Ripper similarities. Alice McKenzie was murdered on July 17th of 1889, so quite a long time after November 9th of 1888, but we should point out that there are other unconfirmed Ripper crimes that could have taken place in between the Autumn of Terror and the murder of Alice McKenzie, most notably the murder of Rose Milett on December 20th of 1888. But Alice McKenzie is murdered on July 17th of 1889. And the reasons why people believe that this crime may have been the work of the Whitechapel fiend is because Alice McKenzie had her throat slashed in a very, very particular way, and the victims that were murdered by Jack the Ripper also had their throats slashed, but it was done in one that didn't appear to be in a slight confrontation that got out of control. She was cut along the throat almost in an ear-to-ear fashion, and then she was also stabbed and cut in the stomach area, in the abdominal area. So this is one where it just appears that there are many similarities to the Ripper crimes, where most of Jack the Ripper's confirmed victims were mutilated. They had their entrails and their intestines pulled out. Some of them even had them thrown over the shoulder, or maybe pulled out and left on a bedside table, like Mary Kelly. But it almost appeared as if this was a very similar crime to that of Jack the Ripper, but the killer was interrupted. That again seems like something that the Ripper would have done, because with the third confirmed Ripper crime, the murder of Liz Stride, she had her throat slashed, but she was not mutilated, and it's the same story. Some people believe that the killer was interrupted before he could perform the mutilations, so he had to flee and find another victim, and that's why Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes were murdered on the same night. With Alice McKenzie, it appears that the cuts and damage to her body were more intense than that of Liz Stride. Not only is her throat slashed, but also there's this very bizarre type of cut that was made to her abdominal area. When I was reading up on the murder of Alice McKenzie, I went through the usual Jack the Ripper websites, and I did like the one that was on jacktheripper.org. I appreciated that write-up, but I have to give credit to Richard Jones of Jack the Ripper Tour, because I thought that out of the articles that I read, his stood out to me the most, and he actually published this on July 17th for the anniversary of the murder of Alice McKenzie, even though this post was published a couple years ago. And it's a very, very lengthy article, and if you reference anything from this episode, I would like to direct you to jacktherippertour.com and Richard Jones. But there is a section that is within his post on Alice McKenzie that I would like to read for you, and it's called Throat Cut from Ear to Ear. The woman, who seemed to be about 40 years of age, had her throat cut from ear to ear, and 2 deep gashes, evidently inflicted with a sharp instrument in the lower part of her abdomen. And if you were to do a quick Google search on Alice McKenzie, you might even read something about how it was a cut that was made in a zigzag manner. The murderer evidently had not had time to finish his work, as the body was not so terribly mutilated there as was the case in some of the previous murders. The police officer found that the body was still warm, and further investigation makes it more and more apparent that the murderer was suddenly disturbed in his operation. The woman's clothes were thrown up toward her face, but only the navel was slashed, and there was no protrusion of the intestines. As I said, that's a very big Ripper hallmark. In at least 3 of the victims, they had their intestines pulled out. This is one of the reasons why some people believe that Jack the Ripper even had some type of sexual arousal from disemboweling the women, because he did it multiple times, if there was indeed a single killer. The spot chosen for the ghastly deed that night is most prominent part of the whole alley, and was within a very short distance of High Street, Whitechapel, and a commercial street. The warehouse in front, where Alice McKenzie was murdered, was near a gas lamp that stands in a large 3-story building, and in the vicinity are costermongers' carts and large wagons in every direction. Okay, though, I'm going to jump ahead to some things that I've also read, and also cite jacktheripper.org, where they talk about some of the reasons why Alice McKenzie was murdered. For a while, there was a watchman that was placed in the vicinity of the area, but he was more or less relieved of his duties. I'm giving the nutshell version, but I would like to condense 3 paragraphs down into about 3 sentences. And some people believe that the murderer of Alice McKenzie was very familiar with the area, that this wasn't just some type of maniac who was out of his mind, that this wasn't someone who had no idea what he was doing and then just attacked a woman in some type of psychotic break. That leads people to think that this was a calculating crime, and there was a very specific reason why Alice McKenzie was targeted, and she was someone who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, because it was an opportunistic murder, as opposed to what a lot of people believe about Jack the Ripper, that Jack the Ripper had some type of deteriorating mental state. Then he had enough awareness of his faculties to commit the crimes, but he was also just someone who was really losing self-control, whereas with the murder of Alice McKenzie, it appears that it was strongly calculated. It could also just be a coincidence that the watchman was removed and the murder took place. I mean, that has to be left on the table, and this is one of the reasons why some people get a little bit frustrated listening to my ideas on Black Box Online Radio, because we have to call it as we see it, and there is evidence that this was a calculating murder where somebody didn't necessarily have a victim that was pre-chosen, but they knew that they could commit the crime and get away with it because they had been in the area almost every day, and there was this night watchman that was normally at his post, and at least 2 weeks before he had been removed, so they thought, oh, now this area is no longer guarded, I can commit this crime and get away with it. Some people might even be thinking about that on an instinctive level. So I think that there is evidence for that, but there's also the possibility that it was just a coincidence. The body was examined at the scene, and I'm going to go back to Jack the Ripper tour right now. The constable immediately whistled for assistance, and a number of policemen quickly arrived at the spot. The discovery was made at a once-known commercial street, and Dr. Phillips and Brown were communicated with. And yes, we're going to see a return of George Baxter Phillips in this one. Immediately on their arrival, they examined the nature of the wounds and informed the police that the murderer must have been done by the same person who committed the murders in the previous crimes in Whitechapel. They ordered the body to be conveyed to Montague Street Mortuary, where it is and now lies in a box coffin awaiting the inquest. And I believe that's the information that was communicated at the time, whereas obviously it's written in the present tense, but just that they're trying to say that that's where the body was moved. Beyond the fact that the victim is about 40 years of age, of dark complexion, and very shabbily dressed, nothing else was known about her. And the things that I've read about Alice McKenzie are that she was living with a man, and she got into an altercation with him, more like a quarrel rather than an altercation, and that she normally wouldn't have been out at that hour, and he stated very clearly that she left because of the issues that they were having, and that's why she was out on the streets. Alice McKenzie was described as a hard-working person, but she was also known to regularly smoke tobacco, and near her body, a clay pipe was found, and after they discovered her body, it was revealed that she smoked tobacco so frequently from that clay pipe that she was known as Clay Pipe Alice. But it is a real tragedy that she was out on the streets at the time that she was, perhaps even walking by that area where there used to have been a watchman, and then there was no longer a watchman. So it just seems like some bad luck, unfortunate circumstances, and just a whole bunch of problems coming together all at once. But let's move forward in the story a little bit, because there is going to be an arrest. And to those of you who have heard my episode on the murder of Francis Coles, this is not going to be anything new to a Ripper Wednesday story. There's a suspect, there's a person in the area, a person gets arrested, but then this still ends up being an unsolved case. I would invite you to listen to my episode on the murder of Francis Coles, as well as the other episodes on Ripper Wednesday, talking about Jack the Ripper. And if you have any ideas for future episodes of Ripper Wednesday, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. You can send larger thanks to me at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And in addition to that, you can go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88. And that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And I also would like to remind you guys that this weekend there will be a new episode in the White Horse Killer Saga. The White Horse Killer Saga is a series of stories that I've been releasing as audiobooks here on YouTube. There are multiple playlists, and the third book is out called White Horse Strong, and those come out on the weekends, but you can start from the beginning with Killer on a White Horse, then the Barry Albert tapes, White Horse Strong, all of that stuff you can listen to 100% for free on Black Box Online Radio. But as I said, in the murder of Alice McKenzie, there was an arrest and a discharge. Let's read. At 5 o'clock in the morning, a man was seen lurking about the scene of the murder, and his movements were attracting the suspicion of the police, and he was arrested and brought to the Commercial Street Police Station, where he was searched. In his possession was a butcher's knife and other small things. I don't know how many times we are going to have these types of events where someone is found by the police who is just in extremely suspicious circumstances, and then they're let go. I mean, with the murder of Francis Coles, the story was all about how some guy was seen even walking after her in the dark, and then later on that evening he's messed up and has blood on his clothes, but someone was able to verify his alibi that he was attacked by people, more or less mugged, and then it's just all of these things just have horrible, horrible coincidences. Either that or this person actually is the murderer. But we're going to read a little bit here about this person. However, this man referred to the police to the keeper of Victoria Lodging House, who came and identified him as a man he had known for years. Owing to this and other accounts received by the police, he was ultimately discharged. And, I mean, are people just going to carry butcher knives around? Perhaps, depending on their profession. 3 men ended up in custody. The Press Association learns that 3 men are in custody in connection with the murder, but the police are usually not going to profess much or to attach little importance to this clue thus obtained. It has transpired that the police have, during the last few weeks, received letters signed Jack the Ripper, intimating that he would recommence his horrible work in July. Mr. Albert Backert, who took a leading part in the vigilance proceedings of the last year, received a similar letter about 3 weeks ago. Now this means nothing to me. Why? There were more than 1,000 letters that were quote-unquote attributed to Jack the Ripper, and almost all of them were hoaxes. The 3 ones that are given strong consideration are the Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter. The From Hell letter is most likely the one that is going to be authentic. But I also have to point out that this is one where you can even just do a quick Google search of Alice McKenzie, and you might see illustrations where they're saying the Ripper has returned and so on. Jack the Ripper is back, Jack is back, and stuff to that effect. And I believe, it's not even simply that I believe this seems more like an established fact that the media wanted Jack the Ripper to come back. The media was taking part in the story. The media was sharing the story that the Ripper had returned, and they seized the opportunity because it was beneficial to them. It was beneficial to create this type of panic associated with Jack the Ripper that has no relevance at all to the murder of Alice McKenzie, where you have a somewhat similar style crime compared to Jack the Ripper. Again, it appears that she was attacked in somewhat of a similar way, not completely similar, but the mainstream media would just pounce on that opportunity. By mainstream media, I mostly mean the newspapers, the central news agency, and then they would try and distribute this thing because they benefit from mania, they benefit from the panic. And then I just want to completely separate that from the Ripper case. and actually look at the facts. So, in conclusion, I would like to share something with you guys. I have talked about a lot of the possible Ripper crimes here on Ripper Wednesday, and I would like to rank them in order of likelihood that I believe could actually have been Jack the Ripper, the person who committed the murders of Annie Chapman. Well, let's begin first with Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Liz Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly. And the crimes that I'm going to talk about in, let's just rank them in order. Number one would be the murder of Martha Tabram, which took place shortly before the murder of Polly Nichols, weeks before. And I think that there's a very, very high chance that that actually was the same killer. Number two is going to be the title individual of this episode, Alice McKenzie. Now, you guys know in the Zodiac Killer case on Zodiac Monday, I don't think that any of the crimes that have been attributed to any of the unconfirmed Zodiac crimes that people think might have been the Zodiac killer were actually the Zodiac. But with the Ripper case, I do see a lot of similarities, and I have to put Alice McKenzie at number second. This is the second most likely unconfirmed crime of being Jack the Ripper. And the third one has to be the murder of Frances Coles, because a police officer interrupted the killer once again, and even when he found Frances Coles' body, there were signs of life, and he could hear the footsteps of the killer retreating or disappearing from the scene, but because there were signs of life in her body, he followed police procedures and stayed with her. So that is, again, more likely higher on the list than some of the other crimes. After the murder of Frances Coles, I would rank the murder of Rose Mylett at number 4. Rose Mylett was murdered on December 20th of 1888. She was either strangled with a piece of twine or asphyxiated and went into a seizure thereabouts. Very, very different than that compared to Jack the Ripper. But number 5 would be the murder of Emma Smith. I mean, this is a possible Ripper crime, the first of the Whitechapel murders that took place in the spring of 1888, and Emma Smith reported multiple attackers and was assaulted in a completely different way. I think she was killed by a London street gang. So it goes the murder of Martha Tabram, Alice McKenzie, Frances Coles, Rose Mylett, and Emma Smith. What do you think about the likelihood of any of these women being murdered by Jack the Ripper? And what is your theory about Jack the Ripper? You can put anything you want in the comments section down below. But ultimately, right now, the challenge question that I have for you is, do you believe that Alice McKenzie was murdered by Jack the Ripper? I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that she was, but as of now, I still have to withhold judgment and say that this could very well be a different killer. This could very well just be someone who attacked her because they had the opportunity to do so. Someone who was stalking the area. Maybe it was even someone who was inspired by Jack the Ripper, but that does not mean that it was the same killer. So if I had to make a determination, now I would say at the end of the day, we might find out that Alice McKenzie was not murdered by the Ripper, but I want to know what you guys think. You can put your ideas in the comment section down below. You can send larger things to me at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com, and that will be all for me. I'll see you over on Instagram, BlackBoxNed88 over there, and until next time.